Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to the Castelline Ministries podcast. We are in week five. Week five. I'm not really paying attention. We're going to be talking about Jacob today. But before we get into that, quick announcement, a fun announcement. You guys remember Sarah from a podcast episode I did before, one of my favorite episodes. We talked about small group and Bible studies. She is creating her own online video or podcasting platform it's more designed for kids. And her first kind of series is country themed. So it's got a cowboy sitting around a fire and he talks to these kids and does story time, essentially. Very great stuff. I'll link it all in the description. And what's even better is since she's going to be creating multiple shows, I think is how she described it, they wanted it all to be housed under one main unity. So they've become part of Castelline Ministries, which is awesome.
It's your first employee. Not
Well,
paid.
nobody's been paid. But if you want to pay, you can support us. We don't earn money any other way, and we want to grow this thing. Castellines are all very talented people, so it's my dream and hope from the get-go. Maybe others would join, and Sarah's the first to do so. So go check that out. I'll have a card up in the corner or link in description. Do that. Subscribe to her stuff if you haven't subscribed to ours. Okay. And did you guys listen to her first episode yet?
It's really
It was
good.
really
It
cute.
is really good.
I don't know how it blows my mind.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, all right. We are jumping into Jacob. Probably, if we're giving everyone a grade, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. Jacob kind of gets like the B minus. But we'll talk about that. And maybe you guys have a different opinion, but actually, let's start with that. Overall thoughts of Jacob as a person, character in the Bible.
I feel like you're a nice grader. I feel like he's probably a C, you know. He was both like he had great attributes about him. I don't know, maybe I'm too harsh, but like great attributes, but then other times you're like, bro, what are you doing? So yeah, B minus, why not? Um, there were some parts I really liked about him and respected about him, and other parts I was just confused. Which honestly, Jacob's life is kind of crazy. He's got a lot of drama.
Yeah, it's it definitely gets more flushed out, more screen time than like say Isaac.
Hmm.
So you definitely get to see more of his character. And yeah, so let's dig into sorry. Just get a bit of static. Let's start off by just kind of highlighting some of the key points in Jacob's life, starting from his childhood, stories about that. We can kind of break it up into his childhood, and then he flees out to Laban's. You got his whole marriage, and then he comes back. And then the story sort of shifts away from him for a while, but then it comes back right at the end of his life. So we'll kind of talk all about that. So, Jacob, as a young man, actually, let's start off as a baby, fighting from the get-go.
Hmm.
Um, and so this is sort of Jacob. He's his name is the one means one who supplants. So he's promised. God promises. I think he promises Rachel, Rebecca. Hold up. Yeah, Rebecca, because he
Yeah.
marries Rachel.
Yeah.
God promises Rebecca the younger is going to be the one who will inherit
Hmm.
the blessings. And from the get-go, he's holding on to the heel, and then throughout the story, it's just Jacob trying to deceive and fight for what God has already promised for him to have. So that is kind of his story, which culminates in a story with him literally wrestling God for something he already has. So, all right. So that's sort of Jacob as a big view. Why don't we turn it over to you guys and stories from his early years before he ran away?
I feel like a lot of his character could be this. Okay, thank you. I feel like a lot of his character could be maybe created by the way his mom probably treated him, because he was her favorite,
Mhm.
and so like I don't know how she expressed that,
Mhm.
but you clearly see in the early like when like the blessings part comes around from Isaac, is like she's trying to prompt him to go trick Isaac to give him the blessing. So it's like, I don't know, that probably wouldn't be the first time she's shown favor to him, you know?
Right.
And so
I
like,
think even worse than that is that Isaac has a favorite, and it's Esau.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
So he's getting both he's not rejected really, but
mhm,
like that's how you would feel as a child,
yeah,
from one parent while being accepted by the other.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly going to add some interesting personality.
yeah. And so like he's getting amped up by his mom, and he probably has this need to feel like he's got to prove himself. Brothers always have that kind of like, not always, but brothers have that like that rivalry kind of thing. And so, um, yeah, I feel like that kind of like spurred him to get that blessing, and then he ran off because there's I feel like he's got a lot. This is one of the weakness. I feel like he's got a lot of fear because you see it in certain ways throughout his entire stories. So
Yep. It takes him forever to stop working for Laban. It On the journey back, he's like lining people up, fearful that they're all gonna die, and he's like ordering who would prefer to die first. Like,
Mm-hmm.
um, even in the story, once we get into like Joseph's story and Judah's story, fear of losing his kids. Yeah. So a lot of bad decisions made out of that, and you can kind of see where that comes from early on. Good observation. Yeah, I find it interesting that he gets the blessing, and first thing he has to do is run away. It's like
yeah,
that doesn't really seem like you won that, but
Yeah.
the other thoughts in that sort of era.
Not in
uh,
that era, for me at least.
okay. The aim like the dream with the ladder that comes right then, right?
As he starts fleeing, yeah, we can talk
Yeah.
about that.
Um,
That's good.
I feel like that's kind of Isaac's blessing starting to manifest. Like, not that Isaac's words have anything, but God's plan starts to move in Jacob's life to where God starts um telling Jacob about yeah, call him Jake. Call him Jacob about who his identity is, who God has called him to be.
Mhm.
And so I think that's kind of some stuff that does spur out some of his strengths, and like the things that we can be admirable about him is like I don't know the exact verse of what God calls Jacob to be, but I'm sure it would I'm sure it would prop up his strengths and like make sense of those things.
It's a huge confirmation as well. It's like, well, my
Yeah.
dad said these things, but then I
Mm-hmm.
think you brought this up last week. You get that confirmation with God, like, yep, the blessing that I promised your father, this is going to come through you. You're going to be great, and all this stuff. So, and you can see that his attitude changes. He sets up a whole altar, and he's like, all right, this is my God. So you can see that he shifts it after that experience. There's definitely a lot that you can dig into with this story, which is typically Jacob's ladder. but I don't think it's the Hebrew calls it the ladder, but there's angels going up and down. Um, and one of the story that I know that it shares a lot of like vocabulary and is kind of having a connection point with is the story of Babel and how they were trying to build a tower to reach the heavens. Um, one of the connections is that the Tower of Babel story, they talk about the top of the tower, but the word that they use for the top of the tower is head. And the connection between heaven and earth was at Jacob's head. So there's a connection there. So it's humans tried to be the bridge between heaven and earth. This is God saying, through your family, I'm going to bridge this connection. So I don't quite remember all the connections, but for those that want to dig into it, there's enough to do some research on and dig into.
So in chapter 28, when he's having his dream, or what the latter thing was going on, God said, "Behold, I am with you, and will keep you wherever you go, and will bring you back to this land. For I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised you." So, like, going forward, like seeing how Jacob operates, like with oh shoot, how do you say his name? Is it Laban?
Leaving.
Laban, like how he operates there, and then when he's given like leadership over those flocks and stuff, like you can clearly see God's hand on his life. And so yeah, and even with the messy situation with his having two wives, he did have a ton of kids that became the nation of Israel. He had two wives, two servants that he
Then married.
Well, I
he moved
think they are
in.
technically considered wives.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
That's fine.
in that case, uh, when you talk about it as four wives, they were definitely not looked as highly upon, but um,
He sent
yeah,
them to the front lines.
yeah,
Oh,
he picked favorites. He put them first.
Yeah.
I do want to spend some time on the wives, though. I just want to
Mm-hmm.
look up something real quick. Because I had in my head that this story of Jacob's ladder happened somewhere. Okay, so um, so where Jacob was when he had that vision and dream was actually just north of Jerusalem,
mhm.
which I find kind of cool that he's around the Jerusalem area. I thought in my head it was Bethlehem, but it's called Bethel. So I don't think it's the same, but I always like to play something in geography so you kind of know where things are at. So
Wasn't
he,
there like a mountain that the Israelites went to worship on? Was that mountain? That same mountain, Bethel?
um, well, so when Israel and Judah broke off,
Yeah.
Israel had mountains that would have been further north than where this
Oh,
story
okay.
took place, but it could have been called Bethel. I don't know.
Gotcha.
I had something else. Hmm. So, okay. So let's talk about the wives, mainly the first main two. Um, Curious, what does your Bible say about Leah?
She had weak eyes.
And if somebody is reading with a different translation, they will get a different description of that. This is an interesting point. I ran into it with my small group when we were doing this last time, and um, okay, so here's this translation. Leah had tender eyes, but Rachel was shapely and beautiful. So tender, a little bit could go either way. And then there's other translations that say she has nice eyes.
Mm.
So this is one of those areas where the Hebrew is really weird and we don't have like a certainty on exactly what it's saying. But more than likely, there's some sort of wordplay going on here. So
Mhm.
they're trying to like use a turn of a phrase to have a certain vocabulary. And I think it's trying to tie it back to Garden of Eden story, where Eve is seeing something and she's deciding what's good and what's not good with the fruit. So here's Jacob now seeing the two women and he's deciding what's the beautiful and what's the good one. Whereas if you actually look at who God thinks is more important, Leah, one, has the most kids most easily, but also who are the descendants from Leah? You have Judah, which is basically the main tribe that survives, and the Levites, which are the
Mhm.
priests.
Yep.
And I think the only main kind of group that comes from Rachel is Dan.
Joseph.
That kind of sticks around for a bit. Well, Joseph, his descendants kind of just get absorbed and lost. But Dan, I think King Saul comes from Dan.
He's a Benjaminite.
Benjamin. I didn't mean Dan. You're right. Came from Benjamin. He's the youngest one, right?
Don't be impressed. I just read it.
Like what?
Sorry,
Boom,
I
drop.
know my Israelite tribes like the back of my. Whoa.
I could name most of them, but I found most people don't know them because if you remember over summer did that trivia game. One of the questions
Mhm.
was who was the firstborn son of Jacob, and everyone's like,
And don't they like the names change depending on where you're at in the Bible too, right?
the so how
It's
many?
like
So the thing is, and this is actually really cool. So we say that there are 12 tribes of Israel. But so Jacob has 12 sons, but then you don't actually include Joseph as a tribe. It's his two sons that become tribes.
okay.
Something in Manasseh,
Yeah, Manasseh.
Manasseh, and forget the other name. So really there's 13 there.
Mhm.
But when they list out who the 12 are, what they're doing is they're taking off one of those tribes. And it's because later on in one of the stories, one of the tribes does like something horrible and they almost get wiped out completely. So there's this interesting kind of correlation where there's 12 tribes, but really there's one extra because one is going to do something really horrible. And what do we have in the New Testament? We have 12 disciples, but one does something horrible. So there's another one added in later. So there's
Mhm.
kind of interesting dynamic going on there.
Foreshadowing.
Yeah. And again, that could just be coincidence, or that could be the Holy Spirit being like, watch this.
Mhm.
So, um, I think so that little weird translation where it's talking about Leah's eyes. I think if we were to try to interpret this into modern day, it would be like, um, it'd be Leah was
Mid.
that's it. No, I used to have a way of saying that. I'm just trying to Leia. So in some translations, it says she has nice eyes. Where that's like the only thing it says positive. So it's like Leah has nice eyes, whereas Rachel was nice to the eyes, like good to look at. Whereas all Leah had was like, she has good eyes.
I have a question.
Yes. Love question.
Yes. So with them saying that Leah has nice eyes, but Rachel was good looking,
Mhm.
basically. How when Jacob and Leah were basically wed, like how did he not know that wasn't Rachel?
Great
You know
question.
what I mean?
One, I think I've Now this could just be something I learned or made up growing up, but like the veil would have been a heavier of a veil,
Mm,
not like a see-through veil.
mm.
And so you wouldn't take that off until it was like, all right, it's dark, let's go into the tent.
Yeah. But would Rachel not have been at the wedding? Or did he switch
I'm sure that if the he was planning this, he would have kept Rachel away. But
them?
my main hunch that it's not brought up, but um it's a wedding, so I'm assuming Jacob was drunk.
Mm.
Just had to.
That's that could be my only assumption for how you
Yeah.
mess up that bad.
Yeah.
So far, it's kind of been the how things have been going.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
don't even think they need to say it at this point. It's just like, he was at a wedding and he didn't notice. What could have caused that?
Yeah.
So that's might be me reading into it. Um, but it's also this is a part in his life where Jacob, who's trying to deceive everybody, is getting deceived himself. So it's
Mm-hmm.
some fun little play going on there.
Yeah.
You have a huge chunk of the story dedicated to these women struggling to have kids.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I really complimented Isaac on his, I'm going to pray for my wife to have kids. She
Mm-hmm.
has kids. Whereas you don't see that from Jacob. He's just kind of does what Abraham does when like Sarah's like, "Hey, here's a slave."
Yeah. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Taken after his grandpa.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I found it interesting that God also closed Rachel's womb because I think it goes for like what God thinks of marriage and like so through his law has not really been established like Moses hasn't came yet and had it laid out, but like through Moses' law he's technically like oh my gosh, I just lost the word. um being like a adultery something
No, right. Adulterous.
no, I know it's polygamy. It's not in the Ten Commandments though. Ten
Yeah.
Command polygamy. It's
Committing adultery.
committing adult. He's not committing adult. He is committing adultery with Rachel and those servants. Which, yeah, I feel like God at that time has been like, hey, this first marriage is like, I want you to know, like, this is what it like
It's honoring.
is
Mhm.
honoring to
Yeah.
me. So
Yeah. And it's also throughout this whole story, we talked about what are the running themes that you see in these stories. And what you're going to see constant time and time again is like you almost never have anyone in this lineage of Jesus that's a firstborn. So, I mean, other than Adam, but Seth, he wasn't a firstborn. Noah, doesn't say. Question mark there. Um, but out of Noah's kids, it's not the firstborn. We get to Abraham, he's not the firstborn. Isaac's not the firstborn. Jacob's not the firstborn. Um, Judah won't be the firstborn. So on and on and on. He's not picking who in the culture they would have picked to inherit the blessing. Um, and then the same thing with the wives. If this was a story, you'd be like, wow, Rachel's gorgeous. She's going to be the one that, nope, it's Leah. And I
mhm.
think kind of like what you've said, this was the marriage. Um, and God's blessing that one more. This is actually a big current thing in today's world where in countries where people are practicing polygamy and then Christianity's brought there and they're like, this is a very tough situation that pastors have to work people through um, because you got all this. It's a tough thing to do.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so the best solution is just to not get into those sort of situations.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
I'm done. This year, my only one. I
Thank
don't
you.
want to. I'm just that joke crashed. That did not.
Dig in a hole.
All right, so next topic.
Next topic. Let's see here. All right, so he starts coming back. I'm sure there's something with the number of years that he served.
Mhm.
Because I think there was 7 and he did another 7 or something
And
like that.
then, did he say 20 years?
It ended up being
Yeah,
20
20.
something years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because he's
Um,
going back or changing his.
I'll put a question mark out there because I have no idea what's going on with the story of like the spotted sheep
Hmm.
and how he like sets up stripe poles and makes them all breed a certain breed so that he gets them all.
Yeah.
I
That
thought it
story's
was
always been weird.
I thought it was both like God kind of showing favor over his like what he puts effort into, like God
Mhm.
being like, I'm gonna bless you. But
Mhm.
also it sounds kind of tricky too, like he's trying to get a fast one over Laban.
Yeah.
He's trying to deceive.
So
Mhm.
I put that down as both a strength and a weakness. Like, yeah, God is giving him favor, but also he kind of duped Laban because
Yeah,
like
because
Jacob,
he's a hard worker,
yeah.
Yeah.
but then he like tries to end around to
And that was the
come
kind of
out.
thing he was doing before he got his blessing too. He was like a sheep guy. It's like he kind of knew his
Yeah.
thing. Shepherd is the word I'm looking for. Sheep guy.
He herded sheep. Oh, what's that called? What's that called?
It's me, sheep man.
Yeah. What did it say? It said Rachel when they met was a shepherdess.
Mhm.
I didn't know that that was a thing. Like women taking care of the sheep. Or
There's 2 stories like that.
is Ruth the other one? Is that?
No, Moses' wife.
Oh, okay.
Oh yeah.
Well, all of Moses's father-in-law, all of his daughters were shepherdess because they run back like the guy saved us, and he's like, "Well, go get him."
Yeah.
Yeah, but yeah, it's a thing.
Mm-hmm.
I've always found it interesting that like the whole like everybody in the stories were shepherds or shepherdess, but then by the time you get to Jesus coming around, they're like, "Ugh, shepherds."
Mm-hmm.
It's like, isn't that like your whole
We
backstory,
all yeah.
where you came from?
Yeah.
But I guess I don't too look too fondly on IT. So
Mm.
our dad's in IT for
Um,
those listening.
so one thing I did think about is kind of like he could have not listened to Laban at all
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
and just gone and did his own thing. So I put down and like
That's
one of his
strength.
strengths
Mm-hmm.
is how he treats authority.
Mhm.
Like he still respects the authority and like listens to him. And granted, he did trick them, but like he would like he didn't. He could have just ran away and did what he wanted to do, but he went along with things and did things the honorable way and all of that. So I put that down as a strength too, and a personal
Application.
application
Mm-hmm.
is like how do you act in how you treat authority and respect them even when you feel like they're wrong or they're treating you wrong, you
Mm-hmm.
know?
Right. Which is an application everyone can relate to because we've all had different bosses.
Yeah.
And
Mm-hmm.
so that balance of how do I properly obey this person, even if I don't fully like or agree with them
Mm-hmm.
within reason. And yep.
Mm. And I think God honors. Is there a better way to say that without using the word twice?
I think using the word twice is poetic.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
Honor.
Honors are honoring.
Mm-hmm. Because he's still like well, it's basically what you just said, but he still blesses him, which is really cool. You know,
Mhm.
and Jacob.
So he
Like,
starts coming back. I had a cool little note. It seems like so Jacob leaves, he's fleeing, and God meets him as he's fleeing. So he has that whole vision. And then he's out there, gets married, has a bunch of kids, and then he starts coming back, and God meets him on the way back again. So it's like God is meeting him as he's traveling, which I think is sort of like the Exodus story, how God like meets Israel while they're on their journey. Um, and for us too, when we start to journey out into something unknown.
That story was kind of, I don't know if random is the right word. It just kind of caught me off
Mm.
guard. Is there like a significance or like a meaning to like when God was wrestling him that you found? Or is it just like Jacob's so used to fighting for everything that when God showed up, he started fighting with God? Like,
Yeah, I think it's still that like this is how he's been his whole life is trying to fight for what he doesn't need to.
mhm.
Um, and then because you hear him at the end, like you give me a blessing. That's what he wants. Even though he's already gotten the blessing from his dad, he's gotten the word from God, like you'll be blessed, but he's still fighting for it. And then um there's something about like where he gets punched as well, which is like his upper thigh, which is close to the groin, which is close to like where your inheritance comes from.
mm,
Um, that I can't remember like why it's significant, but there is significance to that. Um, it is an interesting story though, and would be a great contestant for a Christophany.
that's what I was thinking too.
For
It,
those listening, a so you have theophanies, which are just anytime God appears in the Bible. But typically, when it's God appearing in some human form or it's the angel of the Lord, those sorts of things, we tend to describe those as Christophanies, which is like God the Son is there. This is before he is incarnated in the New Testament, but he still takes can take on a human appearance. Because the main thing with like God the Father is you can't look on God and live. At least Moses is able to look at like the back side of him, but he can't look at his face. Like there's so Christophany. All right, there is. Let me find the verse. Swords. Anything else in the this part of Jacob's life? Because I'm going to jump out of that.
Come to that
no, it's the end of that.
end of his life.
I mean,
Well,
you have a recurring of how you want to share that. Let me share that part.
yeah, but I don't necessarily know if that's considered in, because then doesn't it end where he goes in?
Well, it goes on to Genesis 46. So if you want to share that part.
No. Okay. Well, something that I feel like every time we read, it always says, well, in this it's Genesis 35:11.
Mhm.
And where did it go? It says, and God said to him, I am God Almighty, be fruitful and multiply. A nation and a company of nations shall come from you, and kings shall come from your own body. And first, it stuck out to me because I feel like each time we've read, God always says to be fruitful and multiply. But then what also stuck out to me, and I feel like could be like a foreshadowing um, of Jesus, is when he talks about like where it says king shall come from your own body. And I mean, you have David, but then you also have Jesus, like further down the line. So I thought that was cool.
Talk
Um,
about a perfect segue. Now we're going to jump over to chapter 49. This is the end of Jacob's life. 50 is when he gets buried. So these are his last words, and he goes through and kind of does like sort of a blessing for all of the sons, but they're also, some of them don't get a very nice word.
mhm.
Um, like for Gad, it just says, Gad will be attacked by raiders, but he will attack their heels. And then one of them he calls out for, yeah, he calls out Reuben
I think
because
Ruben kind
Reuben
of
jumped,
deserved it.
like slept with one of his concubines or something. So like he's pretty salty here at the end, and he calls out all the bad.
Mhm.
But where we're going to focus on, because like Asha pointed out, you got this promise of kings. So
Mhm.
now we are going to go to verse 8, and we're going to read about Judah, because that's actually where the story that we follow continues. Will be with Judah. So I'll read verse 8 through 12. Judah, your brothers will praise you. Your hand will be on the necks of your enemies. Your father's sons will bow down to you. Judah is a young lion. My son, you will return from the kill. He crouches. He lies down like a lion or lioness who dares to rouse him. The scepter will not depart from Judah, or the staff from between his feet, until he whose right it is comes, and the obedience of the peoples belongs to him. He ties his donkey to a vine, and the colt of his donkey to the choice vine. He washes his clothes in wine, and his robes in the blood of grapes. His eyes are darker than wine, and his teeth are whiter than milk.
Some nice
So
tea.
it's a very cool blessing slash prophecy, and it's got
Mhm.
multiple layers of prophecy in there if you care to dig into it. But these are the things that really excite me about the Bible.
Is it prophesying? It could be both, but David or is it Jesus?
Both.
Both.
Well, it's prophesying not just David, but all the kings of Judah come from David's line.
Gotcha.
So that whole comment about the scepter will not leave,
Mhm.
all the kings of Judah are from that line.
Okay.
But then it says, until he whose right it is comes and the obedience of the peoples belongs to him.
Ooh.
That's the Jesus part.
Mm.
And most prophecies have like a dual layer in them, anyways. So,
If you think of the Bible as just one giant book, this probably is like, oh yeah, of course they would talk about Jesus. But then you think about how freaking old Genesis is, and then Jesus coming along going, fulfilled, 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 fulfilled. You're just like, that's
right,
crazy.
the amount of prophecy he fulfills, and like, so things being happening in the Old Testament, you'd be like, someone went back in and added that in. You're like, well, like maybe, but like, what's really nice is that the Old Testament ends, and there's like 400-year gap. There's no debate. Nothing was changed about it was solidified, and then we get the stuff in the New Testament, and it's just like, wow, look at how all that played out. You have the whole thing of here, like he ties his donkey, the colt of a donkey. You're like, that sounds familiar. So, and then the last little bit where you get the washing of blood with wine and grapes and dark hair, white teeth, that jumps into Revelations. There's some descriptions. So this is a very layered prophecy.
Oh my
Mm.
gosh.
Yeah. And we're just in Genesis.
Yeah.
So, all right. I think that's all had like main notes. We kind of talked about personal application, but I want you guys, if there's any other personal applications, and then um, any foreshadowing of Christ, and then we'll kind of wrap it up there.
I think we didn't have any more personal applications, which I think is what gives Jacob a C minus or B minus.
Mhm.
So, he's just respectful to his teachers, I guess, but he didn't do his homework,
Mm.
He did it before class. Um, but we thought that we saw a parallel between Esau's treatment of Jacob when he came back and the prodigal son. Like, Esau had all the right to still, I mean, it had been 20 years, but like
To still have
to still
like
have a vendetta against his
Mhm.
brother. Like, he cheated him out of his birthright and his blessing.
Yeah.
I'm sure they had multiple other fights they had like going on, and they ended with him running away. So it's like him coming back and Esau greeting him with open arms. It's like reminiscent of like the prodigal son.
Yeah.
Which is not really a foreshadowing of Christ, but Jesus told the story of the prodigal son, so it's like
Mhm.
so.
A lot of
Yeah.
good connections in those stories. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. And then personal application is just to, I think we've already kind of said it, but like treat people with authority, with respect. Um, just because God will still honor that, even if, they may not be the nicest person or whatever. Like the Lord tells us to honor people over us. And so if we do that, I think He awards it. Awards?
Rewards.
Rewards it.
We got each other covered.
Thank you.
You got each other.
Mhm.
Yeah, mine was that if I think my wording's off, but basically if you're gonna be deceitful, it's gonna come back to hurt you
Mm-hmm.
and your relationship. So
Mm-hmm.
I think honesty is a better policy. Um, and then a kind of interpretation of the whole wrestling with God is you don't have to be perfect, but you want to continue to work towards being perfect. And that's kind of like that wrestling with God. Like, okay, not exactly how Jacob was doing it, but how do I become better? What do I need to work on? And those sorts of things.
Yeah.
So
One thing you kind of when you're talking about your personal application about um like the way you're treating people, like what was your first personal application again?
if you're going to be deceitful to others, it's going to come back to hurt
Yeah,
you.
that kind of
Now,
bled into his marriage because Rachel, yeah, stole her dad's idols.
mhm.
Mm-hmm.
So like that doesn't make sense unless she's kind of been like seeing how Jacob is and kind of pick up
Yeah,
that.
well, they all sort of start doing that same thing where,
Yeah,
Rachel sells or the mandrake or whatever to no, Rachel
right.
buys the mandrake to
Mm-hmm.
try like they're all trying to deceive and earn and fight for
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
whatever, and it just never works out.
Mm-hmm.
Moral of the story, it doesn't work out.
Yeah. I'd love to see that as a reality show.
It'd be more dramatic than the Kim Kardashian show.
My last foreshadowing, or my last note, is a foreshadowing of Christ. And this is sort of a typology connection. So through Jacob, there's going to be a chosen nation, which is Israel. And through Jesus, there's going to be a chosen kingdom,
Mm.
okay, the church.
Mm.
So we talked about Christophanies, where Jesus like physically appears, but also we'll talk about the Bible typologies, where somebody could be a type of Christ. Um, and it's just like certain aspects of their life that you're like, oh, that's similar to Jesus, or an anti-type where it's like. But the point of those is like Jesus is always far better. But
Yeah.
if you want more of that stuff, Mike Weiner has a great series on Jesus in the Old Testament, and you'll learn all about those. Cool, cool, cool. Do we have any final thoughts?
We want to read through Hebrews 11:21.
Just flipping back to the New
I
Testament.
felt like we've been
Sounds like
reading the Hall of Faith, we should keep going and give the people their due.
Why don't you head to Hall of Faith, and I was going to swing over to Luke.
Keep going. It's in the back.
Oh. Sorry.
Come on.
11:21.
11:21.
Okay. Am I reading it? Sure. Hebrews 11:21 says, "By faith Jacob, when dying, blessed each of his sons of Joseph, bowing in worship over the head of his staff." Did I read that right?
Yeah. So, I mean, he did also, his last moment, I forgot about this, did a switcheroo and blessed opposite.
Yep. He's like,
Oh.
hey, I've been in this position before. Hey, crisscross.
Yeah.
Sneaky. Well, all right. That was Jacob. Next, we move on to Judah, which is actually one of my favorite characters in this study. And we'll talk about why next week. And then after Judah, there's a little bit of a gap, but we'll pick up. We'll be done reading Genesis, and we'll jump all the way to reading in Joshua after that. So we'll do a big jump. All right. Thank you, guys. You had some excellent thoughts and points there. And I look forward to continuing this next week. Thanks for listening, everybody. Go check out the new podcast, link in the description. Bye.